I mean, I know that two works that were made with a lot of urgency was the comic about the Holocaust and the comic about wandering around after September 11th in New York City. So, but sometimes the disaster is strictly personal. It's just like, oh, life is not worth living. What am I going to do to stay alive? I know I'll work. So it's not always a world-class disaster, but when I am feeling good, I don't have to work. I'm already feeling good. So the work is a way of making a new stabilization, maybe, you know.
Okay, like therapy or something?
Like therapy, but therapy, A, it's much cheaper, and B, I think it's a bad metaphor, but it's the only thing I was able to think of. In therapy, you are kind of vomiting everything up. You are finding what's inside and putting it out. The comic can only happen after you have vomited, so maybe it's a little like eating your own vomit.
Like
It's first you kind of throw everything out, but then you have to like give it a shape. So maybe it's like making a sculpture out of vomit. I'm not sure. But in general, I must find a more attractive metaphor. It's not really the best one. One problem I have with notebooks is my best drawings really are when I'm on the telephone or talking to people and not paying any attention to my hand, so it's allowed to go where it wants. As soon as one puts it in a carnet, I have a very big respect for books. So even when it's a blank book, or especially when it's a blank book, I'm afraid to desecrate by making a line. And if I make a drawing and it looks nice to me, then I am terribly afraid to make the next one because I could destroy the book with a bad drawing. If I make a bad drawing, then I don't want to look at the book anymore because I've already made a bad drawing. So it's very hard for me to just engage with this notebook saying, it's no big problem, it only cost €3. You can destroy, it's okay. But I always get inhibited. So this one notebook in 1983, many of my comic artist friends who were working in Raw magazine, they kept notebooks. They seemed to think it was quite natural. So I said, well, I can do this too. So I began to do it, and I at least made something that had lasted for 6 months or something. And I was okay with it. I'd made a rule that if I didn't like the drawing, I could paste something on top.
Or squash the page?
Sometimes I ripped the page off and made drawings with the ripped page, in fact, as you'll see in that book, because they made die cuts. So that was the easiest notebook to keep. Then I returned back to my bad habits. And then last year or so, I decided I have to keep a notebook again because I really need to see what I'm thinking and to get over my inhibitions of making a drawing. So I made a rule for myself that every day for a few months, no matter what else I did, whether I was writing, editing, making illustration, doing comics, no matter what, I had to make a page in this book. So each day there was a new, I had to have at least one idea and make a drawing based on this idea. So that was the book called A, and A is the first letter of the word autophobia, which is what the book was called when I started. Objectively, if I can step a little bit back from myself, I like this thing because I like to see drawings that show people thinking. That's the best. It's why I think I like, when I go to a museum, I like drawings even more than most paintings because you really see through the line. It's like an electrocardiogram of thought. And even my drawings, sometimes better, sometimes more clumsy, they are an electrocardiogram of thought. And I know that I like books as objects. Not necessarily that the book has to have a motor and drive around the room, but or be also a table. But I like a book that acknowledges its existence as a book. And these as an object, these three books together, it makes a nice object. And I think actually that the future of the book is as a book object. Newspapers, books, magazines, it's an endangered species, as you well know in your internet business, but there's something wonderful and beautiful about a book as a book. And the irony is that the same technology that allows you to now have the newspaper without paper has made it possible to make the most beautiful paper object books in the history of bookmaking, perhaps. And I think it's not an accident that comics now are among the most successful corner of the bookshops that are all in trouble, dying, desperation for the book industry in America. But the one category that is rising is comics, because comics use their presence in a book very directly. When I talk to friends who are writers, like Paul Auster, and I say, the last book, did you use binding that was a 3-part reliure or 1 part? Because I'm trying to decide for my next book. And he says, I don't know. And I said, what color did you use for the binding? He didn't know. He didn't especially care, because it's not a surprise. Writers, they are mostly concerned with words. But I have never met a cartoonist who did not know the binding of his book, because it's part of the book that you're making. It's part of the visual world that you're setting up. So maybe there's a connection. And these 3 things together, these sketchbooks called B&Os, they make one very interesting object.